Hello, everybody. I'm Robert Douglas, and it's that time of the week again. It's Friday, so you should be deploying applications like crazy because it's Deploy Friday. And while you're doing that, we're going to introduce you to some fantastic guests today from Azul Systems. I didn't even ask you how you pronounce your company name. I'm going to say Azul, but please meet with me today on Deploy Friday, Mr. Simon Ritter, who's the Deputy CTO at Azul, and Geertjan Wielenga, Senior Director of Open Source Projects at Azul. Okay, guys, so first question, how do you say the name?
Okay, so I'm going to jump in here because I have this discussion a lot with Bruno Borges, who works for Microsoft, because he insists that the Microsoft cloud is called Azure, and it's not. It's Azure. So it's more of a kind of French word. So Azul. It's more like the color, not Azul.
Oh my God, is Azul a color? And I don't even know that color.
It is actually, yes, it's color. It's blue. It's a blue color.
Oh wow. Okay,
because I'm not sure why we called the company Azul, but we did.
I didn't even know that. And if this show has done anything consistently every single Friday, it's like reveal my ignorance. Like every Friday, I get the smartest people in the world on the show with me and learn how stupid I am to not even know that Azul is a color. Okay, so Azul, welcome, Azul guys. Would one of you please be so kind as to give our audience and myself an introduction to your company at a high level and the products that you have, so we can kind of place you? And I'm gonna give it away a little bit. It's all about Java.
Okay, I guess I'll take that one as well then. So yes, we are basically the biggest Java-only company in the world. Obviously, there are bigger companies that do Java as well, but we are the biggest Java-only company in the world. And so essentially our business is all about Java, and specifically, or mostly I would say, around the JVM itself. And that kind of goes off into two directions. There's what we call Zing, which is our high performance JVM, where we've taken OpenJDK, we've taken Hotspot, replaced certain parts of it, and then make it into a high performance version of that. And then there's what we call Zulu, which is a build of OpenJDK that we provide commercial support around and also free distributions of. So it's all about Java.
What's the difference between the two products? Because I'm a little confused between JDKs and JVMs.
Ah, right. Okay. So the JDK is the Java Development Kit. And part of that is the Java Virtual Machine. So the Java Virtual Machine, or JVM, is what you actually need to run a Java application. You take your Java code, you compile it into bytecodes, class files, jar files, and then you need a JVM to run those. And that's what provides that layer that interprets the bytecodes into the instructions that are required for the particular platform that you're running on. And if you go all the way back to the beginning of Java, the catchphrase was write once, run anywhere. And that came about because we use a virtual machine, so you can translate from the bytecodes into the native instructions and do that for any application. So you write your application once, you compile it into your bytecodes, and then you just run it on whichever JVM or whichever platform. So it doesn't matter if you're running Windows, if you're running Linux, if you're running on ARM or Intel, it's the same set of bytecodes. You don't have to recompile any code to run on there. So the difference is that the JVM is, if you like, a subset of the JDK. It's one part of it.
Okay. Now, what are your product names again, and which one lines up to JVM? Which one's the JDK?
So Zing is the high-performance JVM, and Zulu is the distribution of the JDK.
Zing and Zulu.
Zing and Zulu, yeah. There's a Z thing there.
Zulu is the part that you offer as an open source product that anybody can go try right now.
Yes.
For free.
Yes, for free. Mm-hmm. Always an important part. Yes, with all the freedoms, libre and gratis.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. Yep.
So then, how do you? So I want this episode of the show to talk a lot about how this concept of open source and the ecosystem around an open source project like Java is essential and important, but also how there's a massive commercial opportunity on top of that. So is there a tension, and what's the interplay? So can you explain to me how the open source aspect of your software then turns into a money-generating business for you that has supported your growth to become the largest Java-only company.
Right. Okay, so let's kind of take a little bit of history lesson here and go a little bit back in time. When Java was first released, it was developed by Sun Microsystems way back in the early 1990s. And they actually released it, was it 1995 was when they first came out with a distribution that people could use. And it was actually 1996 that they came out with JDK 1.0. Now, for a few years, it was closed source and it was only available from Sun, and that was it. Although they had some licensees, one of whom was Microsoft, and there were some interesting situations there, but we won't go into that at this time. And because it was so popular, there was a lot of pressure from various users and developers to make it open source, because open source at this time, remember this was sort of late 90s, open source was really kind of taking off in terms of becoming popular and becoming more of the sort of fundamental part of how we develop software. So let's see, it was 2006, if I remember rightly. 2006 was when Sun decided that they would open source their implementation of the JDK. There were some other implementations, but they decided to open source their particular one. And what they did was they created this project called OpenJDK. OpenJDK has all of the source code to obviously the Java environment. So it's got the Java virtual machine, it's got the class libraries, it's got the tools, and so on. And what that enabled people to do was to download that, and then they could build it themselves, or they could modify it, they could contribute to it. It became a very much a traditional open source project. And that's sort of been extended sort of further and further by adding, a few other things to it. But the fundamental idea is that Java as a platform is open source. And that way, the kind of business side of it is that people can download that source code, and then they can build it, and they can provide it as a distribution. It's very similar in many ways to the way Linux works. So you take the source code, you build it, you make a distribution of it, and then you can provide sort of commercial support type things around that. If people have problems, they can call you up and that type of thing. So that's the sort of fundamental sort of business ideas behind it. I don't know if Geertjan wants to add anything to that.
No, that's really how we see people using open source, that you can get started with it easily, download it, start developing. There's a large community around it, and then you can build commercial products on top of that, either free and open source software yourself, or commercial software, depending on how you're using the licensing.
Yes, because if you think about our Zing product, what we've done there is we've taken open source and then we've modified that under the license terms, and we can do that, and then we've turned that into a commercial product that we can then sell and license separately. So it's all within the sort of remit of open source, and it just works very nicely in that sense.
And if you also look at that decision to make the OpenJDK open source and publicly available for everyone to use, that's really resulted in a proliferation of different OpenJDK distributions and different vendors out there. So one of which is Azul, but there's Amazon that's got its own OpenJDK distribution. Now Microsoft, Bellsoft, there's all kinds of different organizations out there that have their own OpenJDK distribution. So clearly there is a commercial, there is a business side to it, inspiring all these different organizations, these large vendors, to come out with their own distribution of that same OpenJDK starting point.
Mm-hmm.
So why do people use Zing, the Azul version of the, that would be Zulu, the JDK, yes. But yeah. What are the benefits that I get by coming to you and purchasing licenses for your products?
Right. So obviously, yes, it's a very good question. Is like, if you've got Java and you can get it for free from various different places, why would you come and buy it from us? The answer to that really is that if you look at the way that Java works, the JVM is an incredibly powerful piece of software, and it's really the prime reason, I think, that Java has become so successful. I mean, as a language, Java is very popular, but the real benefit to the Java platform is the JVM, and not just the fact that you've got this neutrality in terms of platform support. It's the fact that you can get very high performance from it, and it will scale in a way that meets the sort of internet type of application. So when you need to scale to tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of users, that's when people tend to use Java. You look at people like Twitter, they run on top of a JVM, and they need to be able to scale to huge numbers. So that's the kind of benefit of it. But what you find with the way that Hotspot works, which is the JVM that you get from OpenJDK, is it's designed around general purpose applications. And what we thought is, well, okay, maybe there's some ways that we can actually do things differently and improve the performance even further. And that's essentially what we've done. So there are kind of two big areas that we focused on. The first was around garbage collection. And again, one of the benefits of having the JVM is that you don't have to do memory management manually as a developer. So there's none of this sort of malloc space, and then remember you've got to free it up, or delete objects in C++. The JVM handles all that for you. You instantiate objects, it will allocate space for you on the heap, and then when you've finished using those objects, you don't have references, the garbage collector comes along and reclaims space ready for new objects. That's all really good. The drawback is that most of the algorithms that, certainly earlier algorithms and the ones that most people have been using, in order to do that garbage collection work safely, in terms of being able to move objects around within the heap, you have to pause the application threads so that you're not trying to update an object at the same time as you're moving it. So those pauses that you get introduce latency in terms of applications, and those pauses can be very long. So it's interesting to talk to people about garbage collection pauses, because typically if you talk to people like financial trading people, garbage collection pauses in the sort of millisecond range, tens of milliseconds. That's bad for them. And if you talk to people who are running desktop applications, okay, well, maybe less than a second is okay, but more than a second introduces some pauses. For people who are doing sort of like advertising and stuff like that, they can cope with a few seconds of pause, but they'd rather have less. And it gradually gets sort of worse and worse depending on what kind of application you're running. And the worst garbage collection pause that I came across with a particular customer, I won't tell you who it was, but it was a customer who was using a very, very big heap, so terabytes of heap space, and their garbage collection pauses were 1.5 days. and I remember talking to this customer and saying, well, hang on, 1.5 days. I mean, after like an hour, don't you think, well, it's stopped working? How do I even know that garbage collection is happening?
And How do you trigger that? Did it trigger
well, it was
like
triggered
random?
itself. Yes.
Oh.
And they said, well, it's okay. We have JMX monitoring. We can see that the JVM is still doing its work and everything like that. And then I said, well, okay, so you can see it's still doing garbage collection, but why don't you just think, okay, let's just stop the whole JVM, restart it, and then we can avoid that garbage collection pause. And they said, it takes longer than a day and a half to load all the data. So it was a very extreme application. So what we do in terms of the garbage collector that we've got in Zing is we've written it in a different way, applies a different algorithm, and the effect is that we don't get those stop the world pauses that affect the application because it's doing garbage collection. So we do garbage collection concurrently with the application threads, and therefore we can eliminate a lot of the latency that you get. Not all latency, because there's other sources as well, but from a garbage collection perspective, we eliminate pretty much all the latency that's there, and it's very beneficial to a lot of applications. The other side of things that we've been working on more recently is around JIT compilation, just-in-time compilation. Because taking bytecodes and converting them to native instructions, in the old days, it just used an interpreter. So every bytecode was changed every time into instructions. And that's very inefficient. And it's why when Java first came out, it was always criticized as being slower than C and C++. Solution to that was just-in-time compilation, where you take the methods that are used very frequently and you compile them into native instructions, and then you can run them just as normal application code. And by doing that, you actually get better performance than if you do ahead of time static compilation. There's a number of reasons why you can improve things through speculative optimizations. You can do better method inlining and various things like that. So what we've done is focus on the sort of JIT compilation side of things and replaced what's called the C2 JIT compiler in JVM with one that we call Falcon. Now that's based on another open source project. So this comes back to talking about open source. And we looked around and we found there's this great compiler project called LLVM. And it's essentially a lot of people who are working on the sort of the code generation part of a static compiler. You take intermediate representation from the syntax and lexical analysis of your code, and then you generate optimized code from that. And we took that code, and rather than using it as a static compiler, integrated it with the JVM, made it work as a JIT in that environment. And then, because we're good open source citizens, we contributed all those changes back to the project, so that if anybody else wanted to use LLVM as a JIT compiler rather than just in a static compiler, they could do that. So it was good open source contribution type thing. So by doing that, we can actually get better throughput in terms of like number of transactions per second through our JVM, as well as eliminating latency from garbage collection. And one of the things that we're seeing more and more with our sort of potential customers is when they look at using Zing, the kind of marketing phrase that we like to use now is it's actually can be cheaper than free. And you go, how is it cheaper than free? I mean, like, do you pay us to take this software off your hands? And it's like, no, the answer is that if you're deploying into the cloud, then obviously it's a utility model and you're paying only for the resources that you use. Take a good example. We have one customer who uses a big Cassandra cluster. And in order to do that, they have a number of instances in AWS, which they pay for on a yearly basis. When they deployed Zing, which they were using because they had problems with latency, they also discovered that they could push a much higher number of transactions through each of the nodes. So not only did they eliminate the latency problem, they also then managed to reduce the number of nodes in the cluster, and the cost of the AWS bill that they reduced it by was more than they paid for the Zing licenses. So effectively, we had saved them more money than we charged them. So it was cheaper than free. So
there you go.
That's the idea of Zing. It's about better performance.
Just a call out to the audience members right now. We are in a very deep relationship moment, the three of us here and you, because usually when you meet somebody for the first time, it goes through a number of social steps like, hey, where are you? What's the weather like? Do you have kids? How's your dog? But we went straight to max heap garbage collection and just-in-time compilation, like from 0 to like garbage collection in any new relationship. That's like hardcore. So thank you for being with us at this point, dearest audience.
Yes, I hope I haven't blown the audience away.
Well, usually, battle stories about the biggest garbage collection you've ever seen. that's like reserved for a couple of beers, right?
Yes.
Amazing. I love it. Okay. So the end effect, though, is if what I'm hearing from you, Simon, with all the technical background there, is that it's just really, really fast, and you serve customers who need speed.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I will be fair, and I'll let's be completely honest about this and say that I won't guarantee that every application that you put on Zing will run faster than Hotspot. There will be certain sort of profiles of application where you won't necessarily see either a big or even a noticeable improvement in performance. But for a lot of applications, and certainly the kind of things that are really good for us are things like Cassandra, things like Elasticsearch, Hadoop, a lot of these Java frameworks and infrastructure software, they do benefit a lot from what we've done in terms of the changes we've made.
That makes sense. So how much of that benefit, if any, do I get when I adopt the OpenJDK build from you?
Absolutely none. No, because
there's the upsell.
If you look at all these different JDK distributions, the majority are simply OpenJDK distributions, and they're essentially all the same. And there are very few specialized JDKs, and Zing is one of those. So Zing is really in a special place in the long list of JDKs that are available.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So as Geertjan says, I mean, most people just take what's in the OpenJDK, maybe make some minor changes in terms of like patches or whatever, but from a functionality point of view, they don't change anything. There's only a couple of people who do that. So we're one of them. IBM have their own JVM that they wrote called J9, and that's a bit different to Zing because that was written completely from scratch. We based ours on OpenJDK. they decided that they wanted to have a clean room implementation. So they started with people who'd never looked at OpenJDK, just took the JVM spec and said, okay, write it from the spec. And they've done that. But again, as Geertjan said, there's not a long list of people who do alternative JVMs.
Okay. So thank you. That was amazing. My mind's blown. I wish I had a massive terabyte heap Java application that I could just switch over and enjoy the performance, but hey, I don't. So, but I know there are a lot of them out there. I know that a lot of the world's critical web application infrastructure actually is running on Java, so that makes a lot of sense to me. Let's come back to the open source engagement aspect of that. The Java world is very mature and in many ways a pioneer in terms of open source governance. Can you speak to me a little bit about how Azul interacts and interfaces with the larger open source world as a philosophy, and then how that's put into practice?
Well, we could discuss that in different ways, but maybe one aspect to this is something that I've been quite involved in, and that is back in the day when there was only one JDK under Sun Microsystems, there was a very strong focus on community and on making information available to the community via a generic common platform, a website, java.net. And I used to work in Sun, and Simon was at Sun as well back in those days. And it was all very clear. And one JDK, and every few years or so there was another JDK release, pretty unpredictable.
Completely unpredictable.
And in the meantime, things have got a lot better in many ways, in the sense that there's a very regular release cadence. It's completely predictable, and so on. But at the same time, it's also become more complicated for that reason, for anyone to keep up with all those changes. 2 major releases and there's quarterly updates. Who knows what actually goes into those different releases? And for in many cases, you don't really care because you simply want to just use Java. But it helps to know what the highlights are of the major releases as well as of the quarterly updates. And never more has there been a need for a site such as we used to have in Sun Microsystems, java.net, as now for that reason. So we have this complexity of these different OpenJDK vendors producing different OpenJDK distributions, and we have the increased release cadence. So one area in which Azul is contributing to the community is by making a website available or initiating it, which is Fuj. And Fuj, the name stands for Friends of OpenJDK, and Fuj itself, so fuj.io, is a place for Friends of OpenJDK. And
is it spelled right? It's up on the screen now. Did I get it right?
Excellent. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. FOOJAY.io, Friends of OpenJDK. It's a place for Friends of OpenJDK, and it's really in contrast to another site, openjdk.java.net. So at openjdk.java.net, that's where you would go if you want to contribute to the OpenJDK itself and participate in discussions there around new features that you would like to propose or integrate into the OpenJDK. But of course, that is fantastic and very important work, but that's what a very small minority of the millions of Java developers are actually doing. The vast majority are simply using Java. And so Fuj is a place for those kinds of people, giving you tips and tricks and insights and reference material, like what is in those quarterly updates, and also lists of where to find the different OpenJDK distributions. What are the command line switches? There's thousands, and what's changed between the command line switches of one release and the next, and just to have a central community place that you would normally have for a technology, but it's quite hard to have for a technology like Java that is so differentiated and fragmented and led and driven by so many different related organizations, and is so mature that each has their own community, but there isn't really a meta level above that, and that's what we're contributing to the community to provide.
And how long has this site existed?
Almost exactly 1 year.
Oh, happy birthday!
Thank you. Yeah.
So is this your brainchild?
Well, really, I started working at Azul a year ago specifically to lead this project. So I really can't claim it to be my brainchild. Possibly Simon, part of Simon's brain was the child, was parent of this.
Yeah, no, I certainly can't claim any credit for this. It was our real CTO Gil who I think came up with the idea initially of having a
real
website.
CTO.
Yeah. I'm the understudy.
I'm not the real CTO. I just play one on webcasts.
Yes. But I think Gil was the one who came up with the idea of Fujay initially as a place to sort of put more information about the JDK, as Geertjan said, because it is, it's noticeable that there hasn't been as much information. It's centralized, and being able to find a nice source of where to go for all this kind of useful stuff that people are really looking for. I mean, there's certainly stuff like you could go and you can get the online documentation and the API documentation, all that stuff is really good. But I mean, I've always found the command line switches that for some reason, even in the Sundays, right from the very beginning, they never documented them. And there was never a place you could go to and actually figure out what each command line flag did and how to use it. And I remember spending ages, even when I was at Sun, grepping through the header file, the globals.hpp file, so I could find all the different switches and find out what was available, much as Chris does with his tools that he's developed for pulling this information out. So it's great to have a place that's got all this information in it.
Just let's pause for a moment to recognize and appreciate the people who skip reference manuals, never type the words MAN on the command line. They grep the source code. They have a question, they grep the source code. I first really encountered that with my current CTO as well. We were talking about some open source project adopting it, and its capabilities, and some of them just were not documented. And he was like, yeah, I see clearly what it does. It's right here. It's all right here. You've just got to grep the source code.
Yes. Which is fine if you have the source code. So that's one of the benefits of open source is you can actually go in and you can look at the source code and see what's going on.
I was just going to say that. I was going to say that.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you for explaining Fujay.io, and that's on the screen. I'll leave it up there for a little while for anybody who wants to visit that and see if that's helpful to them. I would like to broaden the conversation to your company's overall interaction with governance bodies. Are you part of like the Jakarta EE project? How do you interact with the Java community at the highest levels? The Eclipse Foundation.
Right. So in terms of like the core Java platform, there's a couple of different aspects to that. The obviously OpenJDK is the open source project, and that's where, as Geertjan said, people go to contribute to the project itself, and we are involved in that quite heavily. So from just a pure open source perspective of contributing to OpenJDK, we have engineers who are project lead on, I think it's 3 of the update projects for the JDKs now, JDK 7, JDK 13, and JDK 15. We also contribute in terms of new features. We've had one of the JDK enhancement proposals, the first one that went in JDK 9. We've been heavily involved in the development of the port for the new Mac silicon, the Apple's the ARM silicon, I should say, that Apple are now using. So we've done a port of Java for that and contributed to the OpenJDK. So that's the sort of contribution on the open source side. The governance side is handled by what's called the JCP, the Java Community Process. And so that's again something that Sun set up, let me see, it was about 2003, I think, maybe, when they set that up as an alternative in terms of being able to provide a standard for Java. Because again, when Java became very successful at the beginning, a lot of people said Sun should contribute it to ANSI, like the C standard, or they should contribute it to ECMA as one of the standards bodies. Sun didn't want to do that, didn't want to kind of give away all the control of that. So what they ended up doing was starting their own standards body called the Java Community Process. And that really initially covered all the different aspects of Java. So it was Java SE, so the core Java platform. It was Java Micro Edition when that still existed, and also Java Enterprise Edition for what has now become Jakarta. So all of those standards were developed through JCP. Now, Oracle continued that work, and then Azul have been heavily involved in that as well. So, for example, we were on the JCP executive committee that sort of oversees the governance of the whole system until the end of last year. We actually lost our place on that board because it was a sort of a bit of musical chairs type thing, because they decided to make the committee smaller, and so there were only a limited number of seats available. So when we came up for election, we unfortunately were up against the Eclipse Foundation and the London Java community. So there were three of us going for the committee and 2 seats available, and unfortunately we didn't get our seat that time. We're hoping we'll get back on again, but we have been heavily involved in that. The other aspect that we are heavily involved in from the governance perspective is the Java SE standard itself. So this is what defines the Java language, the Java virtual machine, and so on. And I actually represent Azul on the expert group for the Java SE specification, the JSR, and do a little bit of work on that to help people understand what it is that's being put forward and how the standard evolves. So yeah, we're definitely heavily involved in the governance side of things as well. For Jakarta, because that's really a sort of a higher level thing, it's the enterprise APIs, and it's not really directly related to what we do in terms of the Zulu or Zing. We have a less sort of interaction with that. We kind of keep an eye on it and things like that, but we're not heavily involved in the governance of that specifically because it doesn't really relate to the work that we're doing.
And actually, in terms of governance structures, that's something that we're trying to do with FUJE as well. So although it's initiated by Azul, there's a number of organizations involved in it and in the board. So if you go to fuje.io/board, you'll find a list of companies like Payara and Sneak and DataStax and Datadog and JFrog and Hazelcast. I mean, these are all really well-established Java technology organizations with Java champions involved in those organizations, very community-focused organizations, and they're all heavily engaged in FUJE. So in different ways, for example, in the blog area, there are different sections, and each section potentially can be outsourced to a different group of people. So Sneak is a company that's specialized in Java security. So they run the Java security part of the FUJE blog area. And similarly, Payara is heavily involved in Jakarta EE, and knows a lot about microservices. So they're in control of the microservices part of FUJE. And also we have board meetings where we discuss common interest topics, like we are running a series of JUG events right now to promote FUJE. So we're going to a number of Java user groups online. We're having virtual meetups where we begin by introducing FUJE, and then a speaker from one of these different companies that's on the board does a presentation to that user group. And there's other things we are thinking about, like doing virtual field trips. So let's bring Java more into academia as a community. So let's not have it come only from very enthusiastic professors and teachers and so on, but let's show the community aspect of Java at schools and universities. So we have a number of contacts there, and normally at a university or college, at some point you'll take your Java class, or your class of Java students, to a Java company, to some company where you introduce those students to the company and meet some developers and what's it like to really work in a company on Java. And of course, now in these times we can't really do that, so we're setting up virtual field trips so that via Zoom, students at universities and colleges can meet people at Payara or at Sneak or at Azul and so on. So there's all kinds of interesting activities that we can do together, because all these different organizations have a common interest in and common enthusiasm around Java and the community.
I have to say that the idea of a virtual field trip sounds really attractive right now. You can sign me up for that. I would love to go on an outing with the class. No school today. We're just gonna go see people doing their work. Get some cookies, maybe. I don't know.
yeah, it's fun. It's fun.
Well, that's amazing. So when I think about the scale of the Java ecosystem, it's simply overwhelming. And I mean, my history with Java goes way back to year 2000, 2001. Sun certified Java developer. That got me my first job.
Really?
Oh, and studying for that exam also basically laid the groundwork for my complete understanding of programming. That was my computer science degree, was studying for that exam. And it worked. I'm still going in a way. So not programming Java anymore, but it set me up properly, I'd say, to be able to work in tech for the next 20 years. So
it's interesting because I remember I did the Java certification, Java programmer certification. I think might have been JDK 1.2 was what I did my certification on, and Oracle are doing a special deal at the moment. If you take the exam before the end of April, it's a $25 charge versus the $150 I think they charge normally. So I've actually signed myself up for that, and I'm thinking to myself, I got a lot to learn before then.
Yeah, I mean that studying for that exam was it was really an exercise in precision, right? To administer a tech exam of any kind, it's kind of like you can't like float along on fuzzy concepts and general understandings with the ability to Google well.
Yes, exactly.
That doesn't get you so far in the closed room. You've really got to know. You've got to know in that moment. So
that's right. Yeah,
it was a great challenge, and I'm glad I don't have to do that anymore. But it was formative, I have to say.
That's right. There's no relying on the IDE to help you. There's no relying on the API documentation. There's no relying on Fujay to help you.
Exactly. Apropos Fujay, to anybody listening right now who's interested, how would you get involved to help? What roles are there available to individuals or organizations, and who do they contact?
Well, it's really, I mean, it's existed for a year, and what it is what we make of it. That's really what that's really also what community work is about. It's not, there's no top-down thing. I mean, there's a Slack channel, there's Twitter. So on Twitter, it's Fujay.io, so at Fujay.io, one word. So there's Twitter, there's a Slack channel. It's very simple. If you have a blog right now, and you've been posting content connected to Java in one way or another, you might want to reach a broader audience. So what you would do is you would sign up to the Fujay Slack channel, and you could reach out to me about that, or you can go on Twitter. That's exactly right, Fujay.io. And you would say, hello, we have blog content on Java that we'd like to promote via Fujay, and then Fujay is sadly or whatever usefully a WordPress site. So with all the pros and cons, good thing about WordPress is everyone basically knows how it works. I mean, everyone's more or less worked with WordPress before, and it's very easy to use. It's not the best way to do things, but it's efficient and effective. So you have existing content in WordPress or otherwise. You can simply copy and paste your content into the WordPress at Fujay. You'll get a user and password. Small promotion for WordPress there. You can just join in and also take a look at Fujay itself. Go to Fujay.io, see what information is missing. Imagine that this is the place that is your Java dashboard where you would go to every day. What is currently not there that you would want to be there? And then work with us to add it. There's an event calendar. There's also the idea. The idea in the back of my mind about Fujay is of it being a Wikipedia for Java developers, so that in the end it's not about the navigation bar anymore and about menu bars and so on, but that you have a search term in your mind. You go to Fujay and you type in that search term, and already you can do that. You can type in, for example, Java Flight Recorder, and then you see a list of all the issues chronologically sorted that have been fixed in all the releases over the past years for Java Flight Recorder, plus blog posts about Java Flight Recorder, including by Marcus Hurt, the creator of Java Flight Recorder. So all these different artifacts, plus events that relate to Java Flight Recorder. So a search across all different kinds of artifacts that relate to Java. Put in a search, you find related events, related fixes, related blog posts, related articles. That it's a one-stop shop that we can all go to share information and to cross-promote across our different organizations and what we're doing privately as well with Java.
So it's a duocracy, is what you're
It's
saying.
a duocracy. That's exactly what it is.
In the greatest good old sense of open source spirit, the duocracy. Right. Just roll up your sleeves and dive in.
Anything is missing, join in and let's add it.
Now, Java Flight Recorder, is that like an embedded program that is on the black boxes of airplanes?
Java Flight Recorder is actually a tool that is now built into the OpenJDK, and it lets you monitor and troubleshoot your Java applications in production as well.
Okay, that seems much more broadly relevant. And I did not know that. Azul, Java Flight Recorder.
Well, actually, this is interesting about the OpenJDK. It provides all these tools that you don't need when you're actually running the application. These are tools that you need for when you're developing the application, when you're doing troubleshooting and bug fixing and things like that. And the Java Flight Recorder is one of those tools.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yes, just to kind of give a little bit more background on that. Originally, it came from the company in Sweden, because that's where Marcus is based, isn't it? And it came from the company in Sweden that Oracle acquired, and they got JRocket as part of that as well, I think. And and then they integrated that into the Hotspot JVM. So Flight Recorder is a set of like sort of hooks into the JVM itself, so that you can pick up information about which threads are running and how much garbage collection going on and various things like that. And then there's another tool called Mission Control, which allows you to tap into that and then display it graphically, and you can see all the details about what's going on. And that used to be a commercial feature in the Oracle JDK. They open sourced it JDK 11, and then what Azul did was we took the open source version from JDK 11 and backported it to JDK 8 so that people could use it on JDK 8 as well. And we did that initially for Zulu, but then being good open source citizens, we upstreamed it into the OpenJDK project as well, so now everybody can use that as well.
Amazing. I want to go be a Java developer, but this is kind of the common theme. I talk to great people every week, and I always want to go like become them. It's like I want to be you. That sounds so amazing. That software sounds so good. But then my day job kicks in and I don't. But maybe someday I'll dust off my Java skills. That really does sound fun. One thing that I really love about the Java world is the scale. Now, you gave me some scale of garbage collection, a day and a half of garbage collection. That's pretty macho garbage collection. Like nobody messes with that garbage collection, right? Like you're not going to top that easily. But what kind of scale of deployment of instances, of CPUs, of RAM, what's big these days? What's really big?
Okay, so give me an example of that. I remember talking to Alibaba, who are one of the sort of big companies in China who do a lot of sort of e-commerce. They're the kind of Amazon equivalent in China. And they run, funnily enough, a lot of Java in their environment. And we were talking to them about various different things on the Java side. They actually have their own JDK distribution now as well. It's called Dragonwell. And so they do that. And when I spoke to them, they said they had 1 million JVM instances running in their cloud. Just for them. That was their own software. 1 million JVM instances.
Wow.
That's clearly on the big side, but there are people who do that. I mean, I would imagine if you talk to some of the other very big Java users, so the people like Salesforce or Workday or eBay, any of those big Java users, they're going to be running large numbers of thousands of instances of JVMs for support their software. That's one of the great things about Java, is this scalability that you have with the JVM.
Are there problems that you get at that scale that mortal people don't even consider or think that could be a problem? What kind of weird edge cases start to surface in
garbage collection
JVM land? Okay, it's all about garbage collection.
Well, no, I mean that's one of the things.
In marriage, as in computing, it's all about garbage collection.
Yes. Yeah, I mean there are definitely things as you scale up to very big kind of instances you can run into. I mean that's probably one of the things which is so good about Java is that you can just keep scaling and scaling and scaling. You throw more hardware at it, and it just keeps scaling and scaling, and it just works. So that is one of the real benefits of Java is how well it does that.
Okay, but no concrete examples of the problems you run into?
No, I don't think so. I mean, like I say, garbage collection is the one that immediately springs to mind because it's the one that affects people a lot. Because the problem with a lot of garbage collection algorithms is simply the fact that the time that it takes to do like a full compacting GC on the old generation is proportional to the size of the heap, not to the amount of data in the heap. And that means that the bigger you make the heap, clearly the longer you're going to see the pause times for, which is why you get up to 1.5 days when you've got terabytes of heap space. And it's one of the reasons why when you talk to people about their design of their sort of architecture of the system, what they often will do is take a very large set of data and break it up into multiple smaller JVMs to keep the heap space down, to keep the pause times down. And it's one of the things that we always like talking to those customers about, saying, well, if you use Zing, because we don't have the problems of the garbage collection pauses, what you can do is simply scale up to whichever size heap you need without getting a degradation in terms of those pause times. It just remains flat as nothing type thing. And so that it's one of the things that we like to talk to customers about.
So it's not just that you lower the curve, it's that you flatten it.
Yes. Yes.
So
and that's
day and a half of garbage collection time went down to nothing.
Yeah. It's one of the lovely things that we show people because
that's better than free.
we love showing people graphs. And so we've written this little open source tool. So again, coming back to open source. So we've written this little open source tool called Jhiccup. And what Jhiccup does is it monitors the latency effect of the JVM and everything below it, so the operating system, the hardware, on the application. So we're not looking at latency of like a transaction that goes through the application code. We're looking at what's the impact of the latency of the JVM on your application. And the way that this works is that we essentially put another thread alongside the application in the same JVM. And we don't interact with the application code, so there's no problem with having to recompile code or change any code. And the Jhiccup thread literally spends most of its time asleep because we don't want to impact on the performance of the JVM itself. So it goes to sleep for 1 millisecond. And then at the end of that millisecond, when it wakes up, it says, what's the time now? And what time did I expect to wake up? And so the idea is that if it goes to sleep for 1 millisecond and during that time, garbage collection kicks in on Hotspot and it takes, let's say, 30 milliseconds to complete. When that thread wakes up again, it's going to be 30 milliseconds later than it thought it was going to be. So we can record that change, put it into a file, generate some nice histograms, and then we've got a nice tool that shows graph. So you look at time and you look at latency. And it shows up really nicely on Hotspot because you see lots of small spikes, which are the minor GC pauses, and then you'll see a couple of larger spikes, which are the major GC pauses. And that's a very typical graph for a Java application. And then what we like to do is we run the same application, same machine, same workload. All we do is point the Java executable at Zing rather than at Hotspot, run the Jhiccup again, gather all the data, and then when you show the graph, it's just a flat line at the bottom, so there's no spikes there. And it's people go, oh, look, GC's just disappeared. And that's quite effective as a way of proving that we can do what we say we do.
I'm a little surprised that you didn't call it J-Rip Van Winkle.
Again, it was Gil that came up with the idea for that one. I have no.
Like you wake up and it's like, what day is it? What time is it? I had too much to drink. Oh,
J Groundhog Day.
It's only been a millisecond. I'll go back to sleep.
It's a good idea. J-Rip Van Winkle. Someone needs to create something that has that name.
Right. Okay. That's amazing, and thank you for explaining that. That's like I said, I learn so much every time we have this show, which is every week. So I put that in my calendar. Rob learns something Friday. I don't have any more questions right now, and nobody's asked any questions from the audience, which it's a little late to mention this in the show. But if you're out there and you want to ask a question, just use the question box right under what you're looking at, wherever you're watching this, and you can. But Is there something that we've missed that you would like to add?
Did we mention Fuji is a cool place to go to and to find information about Java?
Let me get that back up on the screen for you. No, yeah, here we go. There's the Twitter handle for Fuji.io. The website is foojay.io, and it's the Wikipedia for Java knowledge, for JVM knowledge. It's not so much about how to program Java as it is the JVM itself, right, or the JDK.
It's Java in general. It's for programming Java. Anyone who is programming in Java, a daily Java user, somebody at a school or university or getting started or wanting to be productive, it's just for everyday general Java users.
Got it. So I did misunderstand that. I'm glad that I asked the question to clarify. So if I want to find out, whether I should like inherit an object or compose an object, I can go there and start an argument.
You should try and go there and find that information, and if it's not there, you should figure it out, and then post a blog there about that topic.
Okay. Is it like Planet Java in a way?
Well, it doesn't really have a forum yet. We've been thinking about integrating with Stack Overflow. So on Stack Overflow, there's a section dedicated to Java where you would have this kind of question that you've just asked.
Yeah.
And displaying that channel within Fuji. So right now the focus is on providing reference materials, so these JVM command line switches and OpenJDK information and so on, and a blog area. But a logical next step is to think about a forum. But there are so many forums already that we're thinking, let's not start one completely from scratch, which will be empty anyway. When you start. So let's just. Fuji is all about reusing existing content. It's an integration platform for Java reference materials. So that would be another thing, to have the Java content from Stack Overflow available in Fuji, and it would be a way to promote Stack Overflow to newbies in the Java world as well as the place to ask your questions.
Fuji is an integration platform for Java reference materials. See, you buried the lead. You buried the lead. You should have led with that. But I'm glad we got it out of you, and we can write that down, and that could be the title of the show next time. Fuji, the integration platform for reference material for Java.
Yeah. It's the Wikipedia for anyone doing anything with Java. It's really what we're moving towards.
Very nice. Well, congratulations on that. Congratulations on saving the world so much latency and taking care of their garbage collection problems, and undoubtedly reducing the carbon footprint of large Java implementations. So you're doing your part to save the planet as well. I love it.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you, both Geertjan and Simon. If people have questions after the show, you can still feel free to ask them. I'll make sure they get to the right people. And it's been lovely talking to you both. I hope you go deploy some software today. It's the right day of the week for deploying, Deploy Friday. And to everybody out there, tune in next time for another episode. So thank you and bye.
Thank you.